Okay, rolling, speed up.
Slate 7, take 1.
Don, what was your prime objective as a cameraman in the Vietnam War?
My prime objective as a cameraman, I guess, to do what I was sent there and being paid to do, is to get amongst the actuality and put it on film and do the job that I was being there for.
Yeah. How would you go about combating fear?
Fear, it's a thing I don't mean to sound brave, but fear to me was a thing that never existed whilst in a combat situation. Fear to me was a great thing prior to going to an operation or even afterwards. It was the anticipation of knowing what you may come across, what you may be involved in. Whilst there, if in fact you were involved in a firefight situation, things happened too quickly, and I've got to honestly say, you just really didn't get time to get scared.
To what extent would you take a calculated risk for the sake of getting good footage?
I think all the cameramen in Vietnam took a calculated risk just by being there. And being a motion picture cameraman, the actuality happened all around you, so you really didn't have to take calculated risks other than being where it was all happening. It virtually happened in front of you, whether you stood back or whether you decided to go forward another 50 feet, it didn't matter. It was there, it was happening. The object was to keep that film rolling, and it's sort of a natural instinct, I think, with most cameramen that whilst a fire zone situation like that was evolving, you would just naturally put it on film.
Would you actually do it standing up though, while there's...
Oh, no. There were many situations where you just, instinct, you'd sort of keep your finger on that button. You may be lying down, you may be in a bunker, you may be anywhere. The instinct was to keep that film rolling and keep the lens pointed in the direction where it was happening.
I believe that you didn't have much faith in the end with helicopter pilots. Can you explain why?
I had a great fear of flying in Vietnam, and not so much in the beginning, but towards the end I lost a lot of friends. I found that most of the helicopter pilots in the US Marines, particularly from my experience, were in fact conscripts. Because of this, they had an apathetic attitude to the whole thing. Their flying ability was pretty bad. They were hairy, scary situations where they would fly at breakneck speed, just above the deck, 6 feet above the ground, doing mad wheelies, and it was just unbelievable. It was like a mad skid kid driving a machine that he's not used to, and that was my personal experience. They put the fear of God into me on many occasions, particularly on Huey slick helicopters, and I guess it was a fault because of the, as I said, most of the guys that I met were in fact conscripts. They didn't care. There
was one instance, I think, when your helicopter came under fire, or took fire. Can you explain that incident?
Well, that was when I got to admit I was terrified on that situation. We'd been in Ben Het, a American special base camp, which was under severe fire and siege for about 4 or 5 days. We flew in by the skin of our teeth, took ground fire going in, and got out late in the afternoon. At dusk, we took a lot of ground fire coming out.
How heavy was the ground fire?
Pretty heavy. It was hard to tell because on the Huey slicks we had 2 machine guns either side, and they were naturally suppressing as much fire as they could from the ground. But you could hear the automatic weapons fire coming from the ground.
What calibre?
Well, it would have been AK-47 rounds. We got hit about 5 or 6 times. And we only just got back and crashed to a skidding halt on the runway. On a situation like that, I was sort of terrified. We were just laying on the deck of that chopper, and I thought we were so close to the treetops we were going to dig in, but thank God that didn't happen.
And you say you crash landed?
We got back to a base about 4 kilometres from where that was, and we just skidded along the runway. The whole thing, the undercarriage just sort of collapsed. And we just got out and ran, and we saw bullet holes right through the turbine blades, through the whole fuel cells underneath. It was incredible. It just didn't explode in midair.
Cut. Rolling, speed up.
Slate 8, take 1.
Don, you obviously saw a lot of action in the 18 months that you were over there. How did that affect your nerves?
Quite badly, David, towards the end. It's a general rule of thumb which has often been said that if you last 3 or 4 months, you can last forever. That was quite the reverse with me. I lasted for about 16 months and my nerves went quite bad. I wasn't prepared to extend a contract to continue on, having lost a few friends, having seen them dig in a helicopter, and that's about the time I made the decision to return to Australia.
What about other newsmen that, as you say, lost their nerve? How does it show itself?
A terrible neurotic fear of flying in helicopters particularly, and C-130s, another bad one. I used to get almost paranoid about flying in big Hercules C-130 transports. To me though, every time they put down on the deck it was just like a controlled crash. It got worse and worse in my neurotic feeling. This only came about 16 months after I'd been in country.
What was Hamburger Hill?
Hamburger Hill was a very vicious operation, which was in fact a hill which had been taken and held by North Vietnamese troops. And the very pinnacle of it, the American Marines tried to do an assault on it, naturally to try and gain the highest ground. We were there on that operation, and that was aptly named Hamburger Hill, as sick as it may appear, primarily because the hill was so steep the Americans had to do a ground assault, literally climbing up the side of the hill. In doing so, the regular North Vietnamese troops were just dropping hand grenades over the side. They had no defence whatsoever. They lost a lot of men, badly mauled.
Given the fact that you're seeing humans suffering and pain at close hand just about every day, how did you go about handling that? Did you turn off to it after a while?
You do. You have, it sounds rather callous, but you have no compassion whatsoever with the enemy forces or seeing death in that line. It certainly does affect you. If in fact your allies are hurt, you see them being wounded because it could possibly be yourself. That has naturally an effect.
What was the most touching experience of the war in terms of human pain and suffering that you experienced?
One comes vividly to mind, David, was a funeral I attended in Hue, where they had in fact found about 1,000 bodies which had been massacred by the Viet Cong during the offensive of Hue. They discovered all these bodies hidden, buried under shallow graves, all trussed together with wire. The Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese, exhumed all the bodies. They tried to do an identification of what was left, and they had a film, or they had in fact a funeral procession. It would have been 4 or 5 miles long. They had 1,000 coffins made of pine. The human suffering and the emotions of the relatives that attended that funeral was just absolutely awe-inspiring. It really moved me.
Were you the only cameraman at that funeral?
No, not exactly. The networks were represented. I represented CBS, the NBC were represented, and possibly a few British television stations.
What was your attitude to dying after spending a number of months in very frightening experiences up there?
My attitude to dying, I guess one never thought of it. We try not to think of those things.
Yeah, I think yesterday you said about you become a fatalist.
Oh, well, naturally, I think whilst trying not to think of it, you do become a fatalist. You have to. If you're going to get it, you're going to get it. You're sure you take the necessary precautions, and that's all you can do.
You spent all of your time with the American soldiers there, mostly out in the field. What was the ordinary soldier's attitude towards the war?
In my experience, one of utter complacency, primarily because most of the Marines and the US troops that I had come across or worked with were, a vast majority were in fact conscripts. They felt they shouldn't have been there, and for what there was a worthless cause in their mind. Naturally, their reactions in the field reflected this.
It's been suggested that Australians, because they were pretty foolhardy characters on the whole, or they were game, were more likely to be employed by the American networks because they would go out and seek the live action which New York editors were demanding. Do you think that Australian cameramen were used as cannon fodder?
No, not at all. In my personal opinion, it was far easier to second the services of an Australian or a British cameraman rather than go through the giant hassles which American staff union cameramen have in the States. They are paid very well in the States, and there was no need for them to seek any monetary sort of gain or anything else, and apart from that the union had certain control over them.
Was there a defined front line in Vietnam?
No, not at all. Never was. The whole country virtually after dark was owned by the enemy forces. At night it was a free fire zone, which outside of cities and air bases.
Did you ever see the enemy?
No, I got to be honest, I never did, and I think everything that comments that were made to me, that was a general rule of thumb: if you ever saw them, you were dead.
Can you relate to me your experience on that boat going up the Mekong?
Well, that was one instance where we were in very close proximity to the enemy, but we couldn't see them naturally. We were on a swift boat patrol up the Mekong Delta. The boat that I was on went up a very narrow channel, which in fact involved having to get out by going into reverse to get out. That's how narrow they were.
How far up the channel were you?
Well, we possibly went up about half a mile or a mile. We came under severe sort of an ambush at that point.
How far away was the enemy?
Well, possibly it was triple canopy jungle either side, and it was, they were possibly only 500 yards or less on either side.
Off, I think.
I could literally step off the boat. It was so narrow. It was a very deep channel, but very narrow.
Tell me what exactly happened.
Well, that was a bit spooky because we took small arms, which is AK-47 fire, and a few rounds RPG rounds, rocket-propelled grenades, which the enemy had. These were timed to explode not only on contact, but on a timing device. Several did explode near the boat. Had they hit the swift boat, that would have been the finish. We had one gunner wounded, and naturally there was a fierce suppression of fire from 50 cal machine guns on the swift boat. We managed to back out of there. I don't know how.
You were on the deck, and at the same time, I think you were filming. Why were you filming?
Why was I filming? That's what I was there for. It was a natural reaction. I hit the deck when the ambush started. Natural reaction was to press that button and just keep pointing in the general direction, and everything evolved from there.
Were you ever worried about being captured or tortured by the Vietnamese or Viet Cong?
Well, strangely enough, and I don't want to appear brave, but no, I really was never. I thought that would be an interesting experience, frankly, because I had not heard of any correspondents or journalists at the time that I was there were ill-treated. My sound man I had for that entire duration, his father was in fact a colonel in the North Vietnamese Army. Whether that would have been my death warrant or in fact some gratuitous sort of niceties, I don't know.
Did you ever care about what happened to the news film that was sent back to America?
Well, to a certain degree, my main personal pride was doing what I could do best in the field and knowing I did it to the best of my ability. We had no control over what went to air. We just literally shipped it out unedited. It would be satellited in the United States, so we'd edit and do what they chose to do with it.
Would you go back to Vietnam again?
Would I go back to Vietnam again? Knowing what I know now, and if I didn't have a family and if I didn't have a wife there, which I did have for the whole entire duration, I think I would sort of, yes indeed I would.
Okay, cut. Cut.
10-1. Action.
Rosemary, were you ever worried while Don was out in the field?
Worried? I was terrified. I remember leaning over the balcony of our apartment in the Caravel Hotel. It was about 5 o'clock one morning, and he was getting into a jeep, and he had his flak jacket and his helmet and his camera, and in front of him was a jeep full of MPs, and behind him was a jeep full of MPs, and off he went into the darkness, heaven knows where, and that was my very first time that I ever saw him go off, and I thought, my God, what have we come into? But after a while you get used to it, and you get rather philosophical about it. You tend to think, well, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And no amount of my worrying is going to stop anything happening.
What do you think was motivating him?
Well, I hate to say it. I imagine it was just the fact that we were young, both ambitious. One needs capital to start off in one's existence, and we were up there to amass capital. And, of course, to get experience for Don.
Do you think that he had a desire and need to have an adrenaline buzz?
Yes, I think he is. I've always called him Errol Flynn in disguise. I think he's an adventurous kind of guy, and I think he did. Yes, he did need that sort of thing.
What about other cameramen up there, newsmen? What were their motivations for being there?
Oh, they were all very ambitious. I think we were a very ambitious group. We were there for advancement work-wise and advancement financial-wise as well.
You obviously would have lived through some rocket attacks on Saigon. What was that like?
Well, you get used to it to a certain extent, but I don't think you can ever really get used to that feeling. In the night, you are dead asleep, and then all of a sudden this most incredible screaming noise goes overhead. And I had it worked out, really. We had, right opposite our bed, we had a dressing room, and we had that fixed up as a bunker. We had cushions all around the outside of it, and what we would do was just dive out of bed and straight into this bunker. And one night...
hiding in the cupboard.
Hiding in the cupboard, yes, basically. One night there was what I thought was a rocket attack. I heard the screaming overhead. I tore out of bed. I got my legs tangled up in the blankets. I fell flat on my face on the tile floor and just lay there writhing, desperately trying to get out of his blankets and into the cupboard. And Don sort of yawned. He said, "Oh, honey, it was only a low-flying plane going over." Oh.
Did you go out shopping by yourself in Saigon?
Yes, shopping was, well, I suppose shopping was our adrenaline. It was the only thing we could do to pass the time. It was a very boring existence, really. Don was away sometimes for weeks on end. We had a strange existence, we wives. We would often sleep all day. We'd quite often live on sleeping pills, sleep all day, and we'd wake all night. And quite often someone would knock on your door about 2 o'clock in the morning and say, "Hey, you want to play the Ouija board?" Something, anything.